Hi. Welcome to lesson number 1, module 10 of the Big Data and Hadoop Developer course. So, in this lesson, we'll be introducing what exactly is Apache Oozie. So, before we proceed with the lesson, let's have a quick recap of the previous module, which is module number 9. So, in the previous module, we have learned about the Flume tool, which is used in the Hadoop ecosystem. We saw that Flume is a very useful tool in case if you have to collect ad hoc streaming data. So you can install and use Flume to collect a variety of data types such as Twitter data, spool data, Avro data, or any other type of data. We also saw the core components of Flume such as events, agents, client, source, channel, and sync. And very interestingly, last we did a demonstration to sync the Twitter tweets to the Hadoop distributed file system directory using the Flume tool. So in this lesson, we'll be talking about what is Apache Oozie and what exactly Oozie does and where does Oozie fits in the Hadoop ecosystem. So let's define what is Apache Oozie. So to put it very simply, Apache Oozie is a workflow scheduler to manage Apache Hadoop jobs. So Oozie was invented as a workflow manager project. What it does is very simple. It sits in Hadoop, basically utilizing the Yarn framework, and it allows you to schedule your jobs. For example, maybe I have a MapReduce job which I want to run every day at 11 a.m. in the morning. So what I can do is that I can create the jar file of my MapReduce job and copy it to a common directory in my Hadoop distributed file system. Then create a job properties file which is related to Oozie and tell Oozie that, hey, I want to run this every day at 11. So what Oozie does when Oozie tool is active, it will run this job every day at 11 o'clock. Think about Oozie like something like a cron job. So if you're coming from the Linux or Unix background, you should be familiar with something called cron jobs, right? So Oozie is a glorified cron job, I should say. It's not just a cron job. It can do much more than a cron job. So depending on the environment you are working, you might be familiar with a variety of scheduling tools such as Control M. So Oozie is your specific workflow scheduler that works in Apache Hadoop. Now the Oozie jobs are actually directed acyclical graphs or DAG. Now what is a DAG? A DAG is basically kind of a system wherein the coordinator can understand the entire workflow and execute it without going into any loops and using the minimum resources. So Oozie heavily depends on these DAGs or directed acyclical graphs for actions. Now, acyclical means there are no loops in the graph and all tasks and dependencies point from start to end without going back. Now, the concept of DAG is very popular in the latest tools such as Apache Spark. Now, Spark depends heavily on these DAGs for fruitful and faster execution of jobs. Now, when you want to run a job using Oozie, you should have something called an Oozie coordinator. Now, a Oozie coordinator basically accepts Oozie workflows. A workflow is what you want Oozie to do, and a coordinator can accept a workflow and make it work in an ordered fashion. For example, if you want to run a word count program, then that will be written inside something called a workflow. So a workflow just indicates what is going to happen. For example, if it is the word count program, then where is the jar file and where you should store the output and what should happen, etc., etc. These all are defined in your Oozie workflow. Whereas a coordinator allows the execution of the workflow on a time basis. For example, the same word count workflow, if I have to execute it every day at 11 a.m., I need to submit it to an Oozie coordinator. Now, Oozie is also integrated with the rest of Hadoop stack, supporting several types of Hadoop jobs out of the box. And it is very much scalable, reliable, and extensible. So if we have to take a deeper understanding of what Oozie does, it can combine multiple jobs sequentially into one logical unit of work. So usually in the production environment, we might need multiple jobs to work as a single one on a sequential order. So Oozie allows you to define the order and execute them in a sequential fashion. Now, it can also schedule specific Java programs or even shell scripts. So Oozie can definitely run your MapReduce jobs, Big jobs, and Hive jobs if you have, or even Scoop. However, it can also run other type of jobs, such as a simple Java program or a shell script. Basically, it is integrated with your Hadoop stack and it uses the Yarn architecture and it leverages the Yarn architecture for the sequential execution. Now, Apache Oozie is a tool for Hadoop operations that allows cluster administrators to build complex data transformations out of multiple component tasks. So here you can see a pictorial representation of the entire Hadoop ecosystem, and this slide is really relevant at this point, I believe, because we were discussing a lot about Hadoop in the previous modules. We started with the simple HDFS. If you remember our module 2, module 3, we started with HDFS. Then slowly we moved into what is Yarn. We also explored MapReduce. And then we learned Pig, we learned Hive. So we learned all these tools. Now, how do you put all these pieces together? That is where Oozie comes to your help. So maybe I need to run a particular Pig job once my MapReduce job is over. Or I have to create a flow wherein first my Hive script will run, which will pull some data, and then my MapReduce job will run on top of the data which was stored. So how can I do that? I can use this tool called Oozie, and we will be exploring this further in the upcoming lessons. So to wrap up, in this particular lesson we have learned what is Oozie and what does it do, and Oozie how it fits in the Hadoop ecosystem. That's all for this lesson.